Hey guys, what's up? So today we'll be starting with the NCERT of Polity, Class 11. This is one of my most favorite NCERTs. It's a very well written book, extremely well written book. All your concepts of polity would be absolutely clear if you study this NCERT thoroughly. So studying this NCERT thoroughly means a lot of things because I've seen that even after NCERTs. So NCERTs of NCERTs of polity, NCERTs of economy, they are extremely useful when we talk about these things as this particular part. So this is something that we are explicitly studying and focusing upon when we start with it. So Class 11 NCERT is divided into multiple chapters. The first chapter of the NCERT is Constitution, why and how. So we'll be answering the question, why is the Constitution important and how do we have to use the Constitution for our benefits, for the running of the country, for the functioning of the government, or for that matter, a very fundamental question. How do we make how do we make the government? How is the government supposed to be made? How is the government supposed to be elected? All of these things are hugely highly important, and this is something that you have to realize as per knowing what all is supposed to be done as a part of this book. So let's start with NCERT Class 11, Chapter 1, Constitution, Why and How. So let's see, what are you going to learn? How is it distributed? The distribution of topics, subtopics, etc. What are you going to learn? The very first thing that you are going to learn is what a constitution means. The first question that we are going to address. What is the Constitution of India? It's a very basic question. Tell me what the Constitution of India is. So, what a constitution means. Followed by that, what a constitution does to the society. Question number two, highly important. What a constitution does to the society. How am I going to see the make of the constitution? How am I going to see how the constitution as a document would affect me in person? How would I be affected? I need to see that. How would it be affecting me? So, how does it affect the society? So, what does a constitution mean? If a constitution is enforced, how does it affect the society? Very important. How constitutions govern the allocation of power in a society. How would you make sure that the power is given in the right hands and power is given at the right levels? So, if you remember that earlier you may have studied it in polity, that government was at two tiers. Initially, when constitution came in force, government was in two tiers. It was a two-tier government. Central government, state government. It was a two-tier government, central government and state government. So central government and state government was a two-tier government earlier. Central government used to handle the entire country, meaning the subjects which have been mentioned in the union list, as well as state list or state government used to manage the subjects which had been mentioned in the state list. The state government used to manage the subjects given in the state list. So the allocation of powers at the government level was done at two stages. It was done at two stages. So this is something that we actually saw. So it was done in two stages, at the central level, at the state level. Highly, highly, highly important. So it was done at two levels. This is what we saw. Yes, absolutely. Now, when we look at what is the way in which the Constitution of India was made, we have to basically understand its acceptance. We have to understand how its applicability would be important. So, what was the way in which the Constitution of India was made? How was the Constitution of India made? What did the Constituent Assembly look at? So, what did the Constituent Assembly look at? How was the Constitution of India made? These are the things that we need to address. Highly important. So the constitutions governing the allocation of power in a society, what was the way in which the Constitution of India was made, what all did the Constituent Assembly deliberate upon, all of these questions need to be addressed. So 4 questions through this chapter are going to be addressed. What is the meaning of the Constitution? What a constitution does to the society? How constitutions govern the allocation of power in a society? What was the way in which the Constitution of India was made? All 4 things we are going to learn as a part of this chapter. So the basic question arises now that why do we need a constitution? The question that we need to address is, why do we need a constitution? Why does any government need a constitution? Why does any country need a constitution? There are human beings, there are people, they can govern the country, right? Anybody can think like that. So India in 1947 had all the leaders who got us freedom, the leaders who fought for our freedom relentlessly for decades altogether. That is what they did. So why couldn't they govern the country? Why couldn't they lead the country? Is something that we have to understand, something that we have to learn. But that's not the case. People would not govern how the country would run. It would be governed by a document which is universally applicable, and which is universally acceptable. So if there is a document, that document has to be universally applicable and it has to be universally accepted by the people. And that is what precisely happened. That a document is governing no matter, irrespective of who is leading the country, irrespective of which political party is leading the country, irrespective of whether a coalition is made or not. That is how we need a Constitution of India. We need a document to govern the country. We don't need 1, 2, 4, 5, 20, 40 individuals to govern the country. All of those people are appointed. Why? Because there is a constitution which has been enacted. So constitution allows coordination and assurance. Very important. It allows coordination, it allows assurance. So coordination allows assurance to whom? It allows assurance to us, the citizens of India. It allows assurance to every person governing this country. We are given the assurance, tasalli, that you are being governed by a document. Nobody is governing you the way they like. The Constitution allows coordination and assurance. Coordination between the governments at the central level, at the state level, now the government at the local level. Coordination between the citizens and their leaders, the elected leaders, whether they are at the state level, at the central level. So coordination throughout, coordination and assurance. It allows coordination and assurance. The first function of a constitution is to provide a set of basic rules that allow for minimal coordination amongst members of a society. So the first function of a constitution is to provide a set of basic rules that allow for minimal coordination amongst members of a society. Highly important, which is what I just explained. So when you need a basic set of rules, there can be hundreds of laws which you can enact as the time progresses. The same thing every country does, what India has done, it is no different. But what is that base document that would allow the enactment of those laws in future? 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 70 years down the line, or probably 100 years down the line? How would that come about? How would the laws come about? It needs a base document. Just to give you an example, all the starters, all the people who have just started out studying polity for the first time. So when we talk about Bharat, India, it is considered to be a union of states. And how would people be elected to that position of power at the parliamentary level, either in the Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, has been stated in the Constitution of India. But what would be their code of conduct? How would they function in the parliament? How many sessions? How many people representatives? All of those things are stated in a supporting law, Representation of People's Act. So Representation of People's Act is that law which has got the powers from the Constitution of India. It is an offshoot of the Constitution of India. So Constitution obviously cannot state 100,000 things which are required to govern a country through various laws, but it provides a set of basic rules and a specific base which allows for a minimal coordination amongst members of a society to be able to choose their government, to be able to guide the government how to govern the country, and to allocate powers to various offices, constitutional offices. That is what a constitution, a basic document, does. That is what a constitution would do. The second function of a constitution is to specify who has the powers to make decisions in a society. Who has the powers to make decisions in a society? And society, as democratic as India, we are a democracy. We have the power. We have the power to vote. I have multiple votes in my hands. I vote for the state government, I vote for the local government, I vote for the central government, all three levels. The people who are living in a village have the power of at least 4 votes, 4 to 5 votes, depending on which area they are in. They would vote at the village level, Gram Panchayat, then block level, block Panchayat, district level, district Panchayat, state level, state government, central level, central government. They have 5 votes. That is the power. That is the decision-making power of a society that you have. So Constitution specifies the power to make decisions in a society. It decides how the government will be constituted. How would you form the government? How the government will be constituted? It's extremely important. That is what we need to know. Constitution of the government, you tell us. How do we go forward? So this is why we need a constitution. In the Indian Constitution, for example, it is specified that in most instances, Parliament gets to decide laws and policies, which is completely true. Indian Constitution gives the powers to the Parliament of India to be able to decide which policies you need to come up with, which laws you need to come up with, right? And that Parliament itself be organized in a particular manner. The Parliament itself is organized in a particular manner. So where does the Constitution come into play? Constitution is that document which would write about how the Parliament is constituted. How the Parliament means how the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha are constituted. And then respective powers have been given to them. Those MPs, those member of parliament in the upper house and the lower house to decide how the law has to be enacted. What are laws need the powers or need the approval from both houses of parliament? What laws or finance bills or money bills require only the lower house's approval? How should the policy be enacted? Whether a policy requires a constitutional amendment or not. Like for example, GST. It's an act now, but that is something that government has enforced a lot through enacting many multiple laws, 6 laws. So in that parliament itself be organized in a particular manner. This is what a constitution states. So if parliament has the authority to enact laws, there must be a law that bestows this authority on parliament in the first place. So if parliament has the authority to enact laws, parliament has the authority and the parliament would be enacting laws. There must be a law that bestows this authority on parliament in the first place. भाई पार्लियामेंट बाकी के लॉज को अथॉरिटीज को पावर दे रहा है तो पार्लियामेंट को पावर कहां से मिल रही है? पार्लियामेंट इज गेटिंग पावर्स फ्रॉम अ सुप्रीम डॉक्यूमेंट ऑफ दिस कंट्री which is the Constitution of India. So law that bestows this authority on parliament in the first place. That is why we need a Constitution of India. This is the function of the Constitution. It's an authority that constitutes government in the first place. So it's an authority that constitutes the government in the first place. How should a government form? Who all are the people who should form the government? All of those functions have to be there. They have to be present. They have to be taken forward. They have to be adhered to. And that is provided by the Constitution of India. It's an authority that constitutes government in the first place. And that government would function further. That is why we need a Constitution of India. So are you able to understand that we are talking about the absolute foundation? We are not talking about laws which have been enacted like the GST law or the excise law or Companies Act or Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code or Unlawful Activities Prevention Act or all these laws. We are not talking about the laws. Obviously the laws come about by the Parliament of India. But Parliament of India has been granted the powers by the Constitution of India. The third function of a constitution is to set some limits on what a government can impose on its citizens and what a government cannot impose on its citizens. Highly important. Highly, highly important. The government cannot take away the fundamental rights of citizens. If the government tries to surpass that thing from the Constitution of India, when we talk about the national emergency that was declared by the government, where the fundamental rights were taken away, right to life were taken away. So what happened? A constitution amendment was done where it was explicitly stated that while emergency is in operation, you cannot take away certain fundamental rights like Article 2021. Right to life cannot be taken away. These limits are fundamental in the sense that government may never trespass them. And just like that, all the provisions of the Constitution of India, there is a certain way how the Chief Justice of India is chosen for the post, or how election commissioner has to function, how the CNAG has to function. So there are these ways which we have to operate upon. So these limits are fundamental in the sense that government may never trespass them. Government should never trespass those very rights. The third function of a constitution is to set some limits on what a government can impose. The government can impose laws on the citizens of India, but if those laws breach my privacy, then right to privacy becomes a fundamental right. Right to privacy is interpreted as right to life. It is a part of Article 21. And who does that? The Honorable Supreme Court of India. The sole interpreter of the Constitution of India is the apex court of this country, which we call as the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has the powers to interpret the Constitution. We can't say that no, this is also in the Constitution, or this is not in the Constitution. We are no one. Government is nothing. Neither the legislature nor the executive can state what the Constitution states or what the Constitution does not state. That interpretation should be left to the judiciary, which is why when a government is not formed, or when we look at what is going on in Maharashtra, Supreme Court has summoned all the political parties that if something is wrong, you are trying to trespass the Constitution of India, you are answerable to us, and the judgment is pending. So this is why we need a constitution, a specific document, an unbiased document, a strong document to govern this country. The fourth function of a constitution is to enable the government to fulfill the aspirations of a society. So enabling the government to fulfill the aspirations of a society and create conditions for a just society. Constitution enables the government to fulfill the aspirations of a society. I'll again give you an example. The best example in this case is of directive principle trying to fulfill the aspirations of a society, as the name suggests, directive principles of state policy. So those principles are socially relevant principles. They direct the people as to how things are going to happen, or how the government is responsible towards the society, what all the government should be doing for the society. So if the government has to take care of the people who are disabled, or the people who are old and who don't have the requisite resources for survival at that age, senior citizens, or the government has to take care of pregnant women, their maternity leaves, the women who are working, or the government has to take care of legal aid which needs to be provided to all the people. So legal justice should not be available just to the rich, it should also be available to the poor. Nalsa, government has to take care of that. Government has to take care of the backward sections of the society to provide reservations to them. Government has to take care of the education for the kids who are in their childhood, in the primary school, and thereafter kids who are adolescents. Government has to take care of the environment. Government has to take care of the bilateral relations. Government has to take care of the monuments, the history, the rich culture that India has. Government has to take care of a uniform civil code. Government has to apply a uniform code all across the country. Government has to take care of all these things. And these are the things that would fulfill the aspirations of a society, to create conditions for a just society. Highly, highly, highly important. This is why we need a constitution. So having understood all of this, we have understood the functions as to why the constitution is required. Why do we need a document like the Constitution of India? I hope you are able to understand everything that we have done so far. So when we talk about such things, what are the limitations on the power of a government? What are the various limitations on the power of the government? So again, let's revisit that one point that we studied some time back. It is government is elected or chosen, or the method of choosing the government, the procedure of choosing the government is mentioned where? It's mentioned in the Constitution of India. The power of the government, it's mentioned in the Constitution of India. Whatever powers of government are there. So, government, how is government supposed to function? That is stated by the Constitution. And then the government functions according to its powers. Government should not trespass its powers. Government should not try to impose things on the citizens of India. Government should not try to do an overreach, a governmental overreach on the powers that it has got. So there have to be certain limitations on the powers of the government. What are they? Have a look. The government cannot order any citizen to follow or not to follow any religion. The government cannot order, government rather should not order any citizen to follow or not to follow any religion. So you can't order any citizen, you can't force any citizen to follow or not to follow any religion. That is not what our democracy stands for. We are a secular country and our state does not have a religion. We did not declare ourselves to be a country of X religion or Y religion or Z religion, like Pakistan did, like many other countries do. We did not do that. So we are accepting of all religions and we allow our citizens of India to follow and practice whichever religion they want to. There are strict positions which the government has taken, stands which the government has taken, or the constitution has taken, and they have given the powers in the hands of people of India for it to be able to applicable on the people, and that is highly important. So government cannot order any citizen to follow or not to follow any religion. Limitations on the power of the government. The government must try to reduce inequalities in income and wealth. So government must try to do what? Reduce inequalities in income. Whatever are the inequalities in income and wealth, yes, there are inequalities, and inequalities would always exist across the world. It's a norm. You can't help it. There would be people who are poor, there would be people who are rich, there would be people who are extremely rich, there would be people who are extremely wealthy. So, how do we balance it out? The government imposes taxes on the rich. The government adopts a redistribution strategy. I repeat, government adopts a redistribution strategy. Redistribution of resources from the rich to the poor. That redistribution is done in the form of subsidies, in the form of concessions, in the form of subventions. This is what the government of India does, or for that matter, any other government does. This is something which is called as social empowerment of people, and it has to be done by the government of India. So it must try to reduce inequalities in income and wealth. The president has the power to appoint the prime minister. Very important. The president is the sole authority who monitors and administers the oath taken by the prime minister. He administers the oath. In fact, the president of India would administer the oath and would appoint the person who would lead the country. If a person does not have a clear majority in the parliament after Lok Sabha elections, then the president would invite the leader of the president of the single largest party and would ask whether you want to form the government. If they say yes, but they are indecisive of the leader, it's the president of India who can appoint a person from their political party to become the prime minister. He can appoint, and that person has to discharge the duty and then prove their party's majority, their government's majority in the system. In Lok Sabha, they have to pass a floor test. So president has the power to appoint the prime minister. President also has the power to demand resignation from the prime minister. The constitution is the supreme law that everyone has to obey. Indian citizenship is not limited to people of any race, caste or religion. Absolutely, absolutely true. The constitution is the supreme law of the land. We do not operate the way government allows us to operate. We operate as per the Constitution of India. Always remember this. You are accountable, you are responsible towards the Constitution of India, and the government is accountable and responsible to all of you, to all the citizens of India, you and me together, put together in this country, because we are governed by the Constitution of India. I hope you are getting the point. Indian citizenship articles have been given from Article 5 to Article 11. in Constitution of India, Part 2 of the Constitution of India, Article 5 to Article 11. Who would be granted citizenship? Who would not be granted citizenship? People who are naturally born citizens of India, people who were migrating from the then Pakistan towards India after partition, people who were migrating from East Pakistan to India, people who had left India because of the British rule to various other countries, and now after India got freedom, they wanted to come back to India. There were provisions for all categories of people that were made in the Constitution of India. So, Indian citizenship is not limited to people of any race, caste, or religion. Remember that. Don't forget that. So, looking at the limitations on the government, which the government is responsible to fulfill, the enabling the government to fulfill the aspirations of a society. One has to enable the government to fulfill the aspirations of a society. So, Constitution is an enabler. It's an enabling document. It is also a limiting document. It would enable the government vis-a-vis certain things to fulfill the aspirations of a society. It would also reduce. It would also do what? It would also reduce, or it would also limit the duties or the powers of the government of India. So when we say that enabling the government to fulfill the aspirations of a society, what do we mean by that? Think. Constitution of South Africa assigns many responsibilities to the government. Like, it wants the government to take measures to promote conservation of nature, pretty fair, make efforts to protect persons or groups subjected to unfair discrimination. They have to make efforts to protect the persons or groups who face unfair discrimination on the basis of race, on the basis of caste, on the basis of creed, on the basis of color. Unfair discrimination provides that the government must progressively ensure adequate housing to all. Government must progressively ensure adequate housing to all, healthcare, etc. This is what the Constitution of South Africa assigns as responsibilities to the government. It wants the government to take measures to promote conservation of nature, to take measures to promote the conservation of nature, make efforts to protect persons or groups subjected to unfair discrimination, provides that the government must progressively ensure adequate housing to all, healthcare, etc. All of these things. So I mean, why are we studying? Why are we studying South African Constitution? It's an example. It's a reference to that country where the Constitution has empowered the government to be able to look after the aspirations of the society, which I told you are written in the form of DPSPs in the Constitution of India, the Directive Principles of State Policy in the Constitution of India. In the case of Indonesia, a second reference, a second example, the government is enjoined to establish and conduct national education system. The government is enjoined to establish and conduct national education system. It has to be established, it has to be conducted by the government. The Indonesian government or Indonesian constitution ensures that the poor and destitute children will be looked after by the government. Government has to look after the poor and destitute children. Very fair, extremely fair. Indonesian constitution. So looking at these two references or borrowing from these references, Indian constitution also added to such things in this case. So when we look at this, fundamental identity of a people, fundamental identity of people, how do we look at it? Fundamental identity of people. This means the people as a collective entity come into being only through the basic constitution. Absolutely true. So people as a collective entity, whoever is a collective entity, they come into being, they come into existence only through the basic constitution. So if people are coming together collectively as a group, as a community, as you know, just to be able to make their voice or opinion heard, they are coming into being only through the basic constitution. It's only the basic constitution that gets the people together. It is by agreeing to a basic set of norms about how one should be governed. So about how one should be governed and who should be governed, that one forms a collective identity. So it is by agreeing to a basic set of norms. A basic set of norms have to be agreed to about how one should be governed, how a person should be governed, how a country should be governed, how people should be governed, and who should be governed, that one forms a collective identity. So government is responsible to govern every single person who's on the territory, who's on Indian soil, as well as government has to look after the people who are present abroad, working for the government of India. And after that, government also has to think about the Indian diaspora. The government has to think about everyone. That is a set of norm. So if any NRI is facing a problem in the US, that NRI cannot reach out, or even if that NRI reaches out to the embassy, to the US embassy, US government, it would not make much of a difference. But if that NRI reaches out to the Ministry of External Affairs, MEA would be the first authority to help that NRI, even if that person has been living in the US for over 3 decades. It's true, that happens. So, who should be governed? That one forms a collective identity. One has many sets of identities that exist prior to a constitution. So, many sets of identities that exist prior to a constitution. Absolutely true. There are multiple identities, they exist prior to a constitution, which was there. So basically, if there is a set of identity that existed prior to a constitution, now there has to be a fundamental identity of people. And that fundamental identity would only be recognizable if it is stated in the Constitution of India. That is why Constitution instating, reinstating, mentioning is highly, 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 highly important. But by agreeing to a certain basic norm and principles, one constitutes one's basic political identity. By agreeing to certain basic norms. If you agree to those basic norms, the principles, one constitutes one's basic political identity. The basic political identity can be constituted, and that is on the basis of norms which have been stated in the Constitution of India. The constitutional norms are the overarching framework. Constitutional norms about the collection of identity, about the people who are present, about the fundamental identity as it states. It's a framework through which everything would be governed, within which one pursues individual aspirations. So if let's say you are able to file an RTI to demand some information. Why? Because RTI is your aspiration, and that freedom to you has been given by Constitution of India. So if there is right to freedom of speech, of the right to freedom of speech, right to freedom, right to freedom to hear, to get heard, right to freedom to be silent. Similarly, you have the right to freedom to know, and that is why right to information is important. So that is your individual aspiration. If you want it, and people would have to disclose it. It is not that it cannot be disclosed. Your goals and freedoms have been granted via the Constitution of India. So if we require clean air and we in Delhi NCR are not being given a clean environment to survive, we would not vote the government to power. We would question the government that how did this happen? What did you do that went so wrong that we are living in a gas chamber where our health is affected because of that reason? So we would instantly question the government, and that is through and through which would happen, and that question would be put forward. So it has an overarching framework within which one pursues individual aspirations, goals, and freedoms, the fundamental identity of people. The Constitution sets authoritative constraints upon what one may or may not do. All the authoritative constraints upon what one may or may not do. It defines the fundamental values that we may not trespass. The fundamental values that we may not trespass. So the Constitution also gives one a moral identity. Highly important. What is the Constitution doing? It is giving a moral identity to people. It is giving a moral identity to the country. It gives a character to our country because we abide by that. We follow it. We are unlike those countries that probably have a constitution for the namesake, but they don't follow it. Or they have a way to surpass and bypass the Constitution of India. So it defines the fundamental values that we may not trespass. The Constitution also gives one a moral identity. The Constitution sets authoritative constraints upon what one may or may not do. What are you doing and what are you not doing? That is coming as a part of fundamental identity of a people. So when we look at the Constitution and when we have to state what the Constitution has done, so we have to look at the authority of the Constitution of India. How do I state that Constitution has the relevant authority? Or what authority does my Constitution have? I have to express that. I have to understand that. What is the authority of my Constitution? So my country's Constitution authority is that if any law, just to give you an example, if any law is enacted which is surpassing the rights of citizens, or which is taking away the fundamental rights of citizens, which is altering the basic structure of the Constitution of India, that law can be instantly struck down by the judiciary, by the Supreme Court. If anybody files a PIL or a complaint, it can be taken suo moto, cognizance can be taken suo moto, and it can be instantly struck down. That is what can happen instantly. That is the authority of the Constitution of India. So, what is a constitution? We'll understand that, and then we'll understand how it is important, or what is important about the Constitution of India. So, what is a constitution? Just think. We have studied so much about the Constitution, but we haven't attached a legal definition of the Constitution. Think about what is a Constitution of India. What is it? What is a Constitution of India? It's a document, it's a base document, I would say it's a foundation of the country. That is how the foundation of a country is laid. That is how a foundation of a nation is laid. That is how foundation of how we would function, or how it would be governed for ages and ages and years together. That is something that is included, and that is what has been given in the Constitution of India. We should feel proud of the fact that we are one of the few countries to be the world's largest democracy as per the Constitution, and we are functioning pretty well, because there are interests of 130 crore, over 130 crore people that have to be taken into consideration, and only then an action can be taken. So, what is a Constitution of India? Followed by that, the second question is, how effective is a constitution? This is what we'll answer. The subtle hint I have given that judiciary is important when it comes to effectiveness of the Constitution of India. Is a constitution always just? This is a debatable question. Is a constitution always just? क्या constitution हमेशा fair है, हमेशा just है? क्या वो सही चीज कर रहा है हमेशा सब लोगों के साथ? We'll see the answer to this question. In most countries, constitution is a compact document that comprises a number of articles about the state. So compact document, a specific document that comprises a number of articles about the state. There are a number of articles about the state. So it is divided into multiple articles and provisions about the state. And that is something which is happening. This is something which is taking place, specifying how the state is to be constituted and what norms it should follow. This is something that we have to look at. So constitution is a compact document that comprises a number of articles. So it has multiple articles, 395 articles in the original constitution, 24 parts, 12 schedules about the state, how the state has to be governed, what all things have to be formulated, specifying how the state is to be constituted and what norms should it follow. कौन से norms follow करने चाहिए. So it's a compact document which states all of these things, what norms you should follow, how the state should be constituted, etc. When we ask for the constitution of a country, we are usually referring to a document. We refer to a specific document. And that's true, it is a document. It is a document, it is a legal document through which a country would be governed. So we are usually referring to a document. But some countries, the UK for instance, do not have one single document that can be called as the Constitution of India. So the thing about United Kingdom is, what is interesting about the UK is that they don't have a written constitution. They cannot call that this is our constitution. I mean, we can call that this document is our constitution. The provisions have been stated in articles and parts and schedules, constitutional bodies and whatnot. But that is not the case with the Great Britain. The Great Britain would function in a manner where it has all the laws and they borrow from those laws, which they call as the Constitution of India. So their constitution is extremely wide in terms of scope. So some provisions in some other act or a law have been mentioned that can be considered to be a part of the Constitution of India. Similarly, another provision in some other law completely unrelated is present that can be considered to be a part of the Constitution of the UK. So Constitution of the UK is not a single document. It is not something which is consolidated. It is very diverse. It is scattered. They don't have a written constitution. And they still don't have a written constitution. It is not even that they have aggregated the provisions to make a single document. They've still not done that. So the way the political parties of the UK, like the Labour Party and all, how they function according to that unwritten constitution, because they take cues from multiple documents and multiple laws which make that library, which make the Constitution of India, which make the Constitution of the UK, authority of a constitution. Rather, they have a series of documents and decisions that taken collectively. So all the documents which have already, obviously they would have laws, they would have over 100 laws. So all the laws which have been written, provisions of those laws would form a part of the constitution. All the decisions that their apex court, federal court takes, those decisions, whatever is extremely important and should be continued, should also be a part of this. So documents and decisions that taken collectively are referred to as the constitution. So whatever has been taken collectively are referred to as the Constitution of India. So series of documents and decisions that taken collectively are referred to as the Constitution of India. Authority of a constitution. So authority of a constitution, whether it is written or unwritten, still it has authority. So yes, it is a document. When it comes to Indian scenario, it is a document. It is a single document which governs every aspect of the country. When we call or when we talk about the UK, they don't have a written constitution, but still they have a series of documents and decisions which can be referred to as the constitution of the UK, or the country is governed on the basis of that. So the point is that they have that authority. It's not that they don't have that authority, they have that authority. So we can say that constitution is the document or set of documents or a collective set of documents that seeks to perform the functions that we mentioned above. All the functions that have been mentioned that we have discussed previously, they are very much there and we seek to perform those functions. This is the authority of a constitution. So when we talk about such things, mode of promulgation, what is a mode of promulgation? I mean, if a constitution has come into force, what does it mean? How important is that? And how do you ensure its importance? What has the government done, or what have the founding fathers of the constitution done to promulgate what has been mentioned in the Constitution of India? It's highly important to understand that. What is the mode of promulgation? How do you promulgate the things that have been mentioned in the Constitution of India? In many countries, constitutions remain defunct because they are crafted by military leaders. The constitutions remain defunct because they have been crafted by military leaders. Why military leaders? Because there would have been military rule in their countries. Yes, or leaders who are not popular and do not have the ability to carry the people with them. So, which is why constitution is an extremely relevant document and it's extremely difficult to draft the Constitution of India. It took around 3 years for the founding fathers in case of India to be able to draft the constitution. So the first draft, then they discussed on the provisions in the first draft, then second draft and third draft, fourth draft, fifth draft. They kept on debating on every single article, every single provision that they had mentioned. They had to explain, they had to convince all the 389, whatever number of members that were there in the Constituent Assembly. And how was the Constituent Assembly made? That is also a story. I mean, if we want acceptance from everyone, then you have to hold elections to make a Constituent Assembly. That representative from all parts of India, from princely states, from British Indian parts, from the states that have signed the instrument of accession, you have to include them in the constitution in the constitution making process. And then also we had the Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who had discarded the Constituent Assembly. He said that we don't have adequate representation, although even after having 80 plus seats, we don't have adequate representation, so we won't be able to attend the constitution founding. That's a separate fact that they needed a separate country and they did not want to join the Indian Constituent Assembly. But still, we had that provision. So first, making a Constituent Assembly is a task, and then that Constituent Assembly would come up with a law, and that law has to be made in such a fashion where you have to convince all the people in the Constituent Assembly to be able to agree to what has been mentioned. That is also a task. Everything is a task. So it's very, very difficult to be able to carry the people with you, to be able to have a popular vote, to be able to include those provisions if they are important, to be able to take a stand where people are not agreeing. Just try and think in your family. Are you able to convince 2-3 people like your parents and your siblings in the family? It would be very difficult. There, if Baba Sahib Ambedkar or Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel are standing and they are trying to convince on a provision like right to constitutional remedies, Article 32, that this is the heart and soul of the constitution, they have to convince all 389 members. They have to convince every single person that yes, this is required. Because if one person, or let's say a certain section of people, don't agree to it, then how have you made a constitution? Then to it's not the way a constitution would come into force. It has to come into force in a particular fashion. So they are not popular and do not have the ability to carry the people with them, which is why the constitution is not effective. बड़ा मुश्किल काम है कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बनाना. It's a very difficult task. The most successful constitutions. India is one of those few countries which has the most successful constitutions. South Africa, United States. United States also has a successful constitution. Are constitutions which were created in the aftermath of popular national movements. So the people of that country, they understood that what the gamut of their country is. They understood their country. They understood the mentality of people. They understood the diversity. They understood how, like, for example, in India's case, it is a big country. It is a big country in terms of regions and religions, language, diversity, script, text. Everything is different. Cultures are different. Everything is different. So, how do you still carry the country together? It is very difficult to carry the country together after having so many differences, after having not differences, but so much of diversity. You are still being able to carry forward the entire country together. Hats off to the political leaders in the past and now that they consider themselves to be an Indian. When a cricket match happens, everybody is an Indian. When a war happens, everybody is an Indian. They don't divide themselves on the basis of language, on the basis of culture, on the basis of religion, on the basis of region. Everybody is an Indian. Everybody celebrates India's win. That is what the constitution gives. What has bound the people together? It is the constitution of India. And the constitution of India, the principles are being followed by who? They are being followed by the governments. They are being followed by the political leaders. And they are taking every person forward. So what do people do if they find out that constitution is not just? Constitution ने ठीक नहीं करा है या constitution में जो चीज़ लिखी है वो unfair है, just नहीं है. What is the mode of promulgation? What can we do if you find out that constitution is not just? What happens to people when a constitution exists only on paper? It's a very pertinent question. Constitution आपने लिख तो दिया, कागज पे है, क्या करें? What to do? So constitution has to function in a certain manner, no? So what to do? What is supposed to be done? So constitution exists only on paper. This should not be the case. Constitution should exist. Everything should happen as per the constitution in practicality. So let's take the example of Nepal. It's a very relevant example, and if you read the NCERT, it's a beautifully written book. And if you're not reading the NCERT, my videos are the single point one-stop shop alternative. Just watch the entire series. I'll make a playlist when this is over. All the chapters are over. You don't need to look anywhere else except for this. This is the most detailed, holistic explanation that you are getting of class 11 NCERT. Let's take the example of Nepal. Nepal is an example of the complicated nature of constitution making. It's a complicated nature of constitution making. Absolutely true. Agreed. Complicated nature है constitution making का. कैसे? Since 1948, Nepal has had 5 constitutions. In 1948, in 1951, 1959, 1962 and 1990. Because there were multiple movements happening, dominion status, the king, and the uprising that was happening from the Communist Party, from the leftist. So, which is why they had to rewrite the constitution. They had 5 constitutions. But all these constitutions were granted by the king of Nepal. So again, it's an authoritarian approach. If the king would state that from tomorrow we'll have a new constitution, have you asked the people? Have you considered what the people have said? If you have, then you should take those people into consideration, make a constituent assembly, and then come up with a constitution. Otherwise, so anybody can say that from today we would not follow these 10 provisions, and from tomorrow we'll follow these 10 provisions, the separate 10 provisions. So that is an authoritarian attitude. It is not something where you have come up with a constitution which is right or which should happen like that. So it was granting something that was granted by the king of Nepal. It is still considered to be authoritative. The constitution that came about the last, which was in 1990, introduced a multi-party competition. This is something which is good. Multi-party competition means you would have multiple parties, just like Britain. Britain has a royal family, the queen, the king, and then you have the elected political leaders, which contest elections. Though they contest elections on the basis of which party they are representing. So multi-party competition, though the king continued to hold final powers in many respects. So same thing that happens in the UK, although UK Queen doesn't have those many powers. So it's the royal family. They still are based as a powerful family of the entire world, one of the powerful families of the entire world. But on the other hand, a multi-party system does exist in the Great Britain. How do they operate? What all is supposed to happen in their country? Everything, they have everything as a part of them. So it introduced a multi-party competition, though the king continued to hold final powers in many respects. King had final powers in many respects. This was in 1990. For the last 10 years, Nepal was faced with militant political agitations for restructuring the government of the country. So, militant political agitations would be there. People would say, "आप जो बोलोगे हम वही करेंगे." नहीं, we won't do it. So it would result into political agitations. It would result into people demanding restructuring the government of the country. Now you need to have elected people. Now you need to have an elected leader. You cannot be a China. You cannot be a China where you restrict that we would not allow any global website to function in our country. Google, Facebook, YouTube, Gmail doesn't operate in China. There's nothing in China. China has equivalent of everything. That is again an authoritative attitude. Either you become an authoritative country like North Korea is, like China is. Either you become that. If you don't want to become that, then make sure that you take into account the demands of the people of the country. That is also important. So agitations for restructuring the government of the country, highly, highly, highly important. So this is something that led to this. The main issue was the role of monarchy in the constitution of Nepal. Every time this is the main issue. In every single sense, this will be the main issue, and this would keep on resulting into multiple problems that would exist in every country. Monarchy, if monarchy, one family or one king would state everything, people would be pissed off after a certain while. Finally, under pressure of popular agitation, the king had to install a government acceptable to the agitating parties. He did, and it's functioning pretty well even today. So this government has stripped the king of almost all powers. Now it's a reverse psychology. The government has become powerful. It has stripped the king of almost all powers. That, okay, now there's a government, a democratically elected government. The power is in our hands. Now let us function the way a government is supposed to function. Only then you can see development. Only then you can see good bilateral relations. Absolutely. So all the parties are trying to decide the manner in which a constituent assembly will be formed, and they would be able to come up with a new constitution. This is what they did. So the substantive provisions of a constitution of India is what we'll continue with in the next class. Hi, I hope you enjoyed the entire lecture. Yes. So when we talk about such things, it's highly important for you to understand the gist of whatever we are studying. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye. Take care. Join me for the next session. I hope you enjoyed the session.